Welcome back, everyone, to Exposing Our Fake Past.
Hi, everyone.
We're back for episode 3, and today,
It's going to be a good one.
we're diving into some pretty mind-bending stuff.
We are. Buckle up.
We're talking about the work of Anatoly Fomenko,
Yeah.
a Russian mathematician who's basically
turning history on its head.
throwing a wrench into how we think about history.
Yeah, and the timeline.
Exactly. So,
The historical timeline.
so if he's a mathematician,
Yeah.
how did he even end up shaking up history like this?
Right. So Fomenko, back in the 1970s,
Yep.
he was studying celestial mechanics, the movements of planets and stars. And he came across research by this American astrophysicist, Robert Newton,
Okay.
who was using historical records of lunar eclipses
Interesting.
to figure out how the moon rotates.
Okay.
But here's where it gets interesting.
Oh, hey, we're ready.
Fomenko, he noticed some really big inconsistencies in Newton's data, which suggested that the moon's rotation had sped up dramatically and then slowed down again between 800 BC and 1000 AD.
Wait, so the moon just decided to, hit the gas for a few centuries?
Right, it doesn't make sense.
And then slam on the brakes. That doesn't sound physically possible.
Exactly. There's no scientific explanation for that kind of change in the moon's rotation.
Right, it just defied the laws of physics as we understand them.
Totally.
So what did Fomenko do? Just ignore this lunar mystery?
Well, he was too intrigued to let it go.
Yeah.
He realized that the problem might not be with the calculations themselves, but with the accuracy of the dates for those historical lunar eclipses that Newton was using.
Okay.
So he dug deeper, and he found that another Russian scientist, Nikolai Morozov,
Interesting.
had also questioned the traditional dating of ancient eclipses and even proposed some alternate dates.
Okay, so is Fomenko basically testing out Morozov's dates then?
Yeah, he did. And get this, when he plugged Morozov's eclipse dates into Newton's calculations.
Oh, wow.
The inconsistencies vanished.
Yeah.
The moon's rotation suddenly made perfect sense across the entire timeline.
So by simply, tweaking the dates, this major scientific paradox just disappears.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It is pretty wild. And this was Fomenko's aha moment.
Oh, I see.
It made him question the entire foundation of the historical timeline that we just accept as fact.
Right.
Could it be that our understanding of history is based on shaky ground?
That's a bold question to ask.
It is.
And I'm guessing it didn't make him very popular with traditional historians.
You're right. The historical community has been and still is largely resistant to his ideas.
Yeah, I can imagine.
He's challenging centuries of accepted knowledge.
Right.
So to understand why his theories are so disruptive, we need to look at how our current historical timeline was established in the first place.
Okay, so a quick history lesson.
A little history lesson.
Within a history questioning podcast.
Exactly.
That's ironic.
Right.
I love it.
So much of what we consider our standard historical timeline comes from the work of this 16th century scholar named Joseph Scaliger.
Okay.
He meticulously pieced together ancient texts and astronomical records to create this chronological framework.
So Scaliger is like the architect of our historical understanding.
You could say that.
Okay.
But Fomenko argues that Scaliger's methods, while groundbreaking for their time, relied heavily on interpretations of ancient texts and astronomical events that could be flawed or incomplete.
So he's not saying that history is completely made up.
Right.
But he's saying that the timeline might need some serious adjustments.
Exactly. Fomenko proposes a more mathematically rigorous approach to analyzing historical data.
I like it.
Yeah. He developed several statistical methods to compare historical texts and look for hidden patterns that might reveal inconsistencies in the traditional timeline.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty here.
Yeah.
What are some of these mathematical tools he's using?
Okay, so one of the most fascinating is called the method of correlation of maximums. So imagine you have a historical text that covers a series of years.
Okay.
You can create a graph that visually represents the amount of text dedicated to each year, kind of like a skyline silhouette of the narrative.
So you're looking for peaks and valleys in the added detail given to different years.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Fomenko found that texts describing the same historical periods often have similar shapes, these similar skylines.
Okay.
But here's the twist. He also found that texts supposedly from completely different time periods sometimes had strikingly similar shapes. Suggesting they might actually be describing the same events, just placed in different spots on the timeline.
That's like finding two puzzle pieces that fit perfectly.
Right.
Even though they were thought to be from completely different puzzles.
Exactly. It's like history is playing a game of hide and seek with itself.
I like that.
And another tool that Fomenko uses is the method of dynastic parallelism. This one focuses on comparing ruling families' dynasties across different historical periods.
Got it.
He creates what he calls dynastic profiles for each dynasty.
Okay.
Sort of like unique fingerprints for ruling families.
So he's looking for patterns in how different dynasties rose and fell.
Yeah.
Like a family tree, but for power structures.
Exactly.
Right.
And what he found is that some dynasties, supposedly separated by hundreds of years, have remarkably similar profiles.
Wow.
The length of their reign as significant events during their rule.
Interesting.
Even the order of succession. It's as if these dynasties are historical doppelgangers, separated only by time.
My mind is officially bending. Are there more of these mathematical methods that he's using?
There are. Another one is the method of frequency decay.
Okay.
Which analyzes how often key figures are mentioned in historical texts.
Got it.
So the idea is that as time passes, mentions of a specific person should gradually decrease.
Right. People move on, new figures take center stage.
Exactly. But Fomenko found that sometimes there are these unexpected spikes in mentions, where figures from long ago suddenly get this surge of attention.
Interesting.
And he suggests that these spikes could be clues. That the chronological order is off. It's like a historical echo where the past kind of reverberates into the present at an unexpected moment. I see.
So it's like Fomenko is like this historical detective. Using math as his magnifying glass.
Love that analogy.
What else has he uncovered with all these methods?
So his research goes beyond just texts.
Okay.
He's also applied his analysis to ancient maps.
Wait, maps?
Yeah.
How do maps factor into historical timelines?
Well, the accuracy and detail of a map can tell you a lot about when it was created.
Okay.
The more advanced the map,
yeah,
the more likely it is to have been made during a time of greater geographical understanding.
That makes sense.
Fomenko found discrepancies between the traditional dating of some maps and the level of detail that they contained. For example, his analysis of the famous Ptolemy maps.
Okay.
Long thought to be from the 2nd century AD, suggested that they might actually be from much later.
Wow.
Maybe even the 15th or 16th centuries.
A difference of over 1,000 years. That's huge.
Huge, yeah.
That would completely rewrite our understanding of exploration and cartography.
Right.
So where do all of these methods and discoveries lead Fomenko?
They lead him to propose this truly radical theory.
Okay.
He calls the new chronology.
Okay.
And to truly grasp its scope, we need to talk about something Fomenko created.
Okay.
The global chronological map.
Ooh.
But before we get into that, what are your thoughts on what we've covered so far?
Yeah, does this mathematical approach to history even seem plausible?
Yeah, and do you think there's something to these phantom periods and historical doppelgangers?
Let us know your thoughts.
Yeah.
Because we're just getting started.
We're just getting warmed up.
So we've been talking about Fomenko's new chronology, but it's like hard to really grasp the scale of what he's saying.
It is big.
Yeah, without some way to actually see it.
Yeah, to visualize it.
So that's where this global chronological map comes in, right?
Right, exactly. Fomenko created this incredibly ambitious map
Wow.
to try and visually represent these potential chronological shifts and phantom periods he's proposing.
So, like, what does this map actually look like?
Yeah.
Is it just like a timeline with, like, scribbles and question marks all over it?
No, it's way more sophisticated than that.
Okay.
Picture a massive timeline, right? Spanning thousands of years.
Okay.
So Fomenko starts by plotting out major historical events, according to the traditional chronology. Then, using his statistical methods, he starts highlighting those doubles.
Okay.
Like the events or dynasties that seem to be echoes of each other,
right?
Even though they're placed in different eras.
So he's basically like drawing lines.
Yeah.
Between all the historical doppelgangers on this giant timeline.
They're like connecting the dots.
Yeah. Yeah, showing us where history might be repeating itself.
Exactly.
Right.
And the result is this mind-boggling tapestry of connections and inconsistencies that challenges our whole notion of like historical linearity.
Right. Like, what if events didn't always happen in a neat straight line?
Right.
Like we've always assumed.
What if it's more like a spiral?
Or a pretzel. Yeah. Okay, so if Fomenko is right.
Yeah.
And, like, chunks of history are out of order. How do we even begin to untangle it all? It's like someone shuffled the pages of a history book.
I know.
And now we have to figure out the correct order.
It is a puzzle.
Yeah.
It's a monumental task.
Yeah.
And Fomenko acknowledges that,
Right.
his new chronology is a work in progress.
Okay.
It's not meant to be a definitive answer.
Right.
It's more like a starting point
Oh, wait.
for this radical reexamination of history.
But it does raise a pretty big question, like why would history
Right.
be rewritten in the first place? What would be the motive for creating these phantom periods?
That is one of the most fascinating and controversial aspects of his theory.
Okay, let's get into it.
He suggests that these historical duplications weren't just accidental.
Okay.
He believes that they were deliberate distortions,
Hmm.
possibly orchestrated by powerful forces in the Middle Ages.
Okay, now we're getting into conspiracy theory territory.
I know, right?
Seriously, like, what possible reason could someone have
Yeah.
for messing with the historical timeline on such a massive scale?
Well, Fomenko proposes a few possible motives.
Okay, I'm listening.
One is, imagine rulers in the Middle Ages
Yeah.
wanting to legitimize their power
Okay.
and create this grander, more ancient lineage for themselves.
Okay.
They might fabricate historical connections to powerful empires of the past.
So it's like historical PR,
It is.
crafting a more impressive image for yourself
Totally.
by borrowing from the past.
Got it.
Like adding a few Roman emperors to your family tree on Ancestry.com
Yeah.
to make it look more impressive.
It's like saying, look, we're not just some new kids on the block.
Right.
We're the rightful heirs to this glorious legacy that stretches back centuries.
That's clever,
It is.
but also incredibly deceptive.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Are there any other motives that he suggests?
He also suggests that certain groups might have wanted to control the narrative of history,
Okay.
to suppress certain events or to promote specific ideologies.
So it becomes a battle over who gets to tell the story
Right.
and whose version of the past becomes the accepted truth.
Exactly. It's a power struggle.
Wow. So in Fomenko's view, this potential rewriting of history was a deliberate act of manipulation.
That's what he proposes.
Wow.
And, whether it was intentional or just a series of errors that compounded over time, the implications are huge.
Yeah, it challenges us to rethink everything
Everything.
that we thought we knew about the past. It's like suddenly realizing that the history book we've been reading our whole lives might have missing chapters.
Missing chapters.
Or even like chapters in the wrong order.
In the wrong order. I know it's unsettling.
Yeah, so where does that leave us?
Yeah.
Like, if Fomenko's new chronology is even partially correct,
Right.
what happens to all the history we've been taught?
Right.
Do we just throw out our textbooks and start over?
It's not that simple.
Okay.
Fomenko's work has sparked this fierce debate within the historical community,
I have that.
with passionate arguments for and against his theories.
Yeah.
It's a paradigm shift, and like any paradigm shift,
Yeah.
it's met with resistance,
Sure.
skepticism, even ridicule.
It must be so hard for historians
Oh.
who've spent their entire careers studying a particular period to
Yeah.
suddenly be told that it might not have happened the way they thought it did.
I know, their whole life's work kind of questioned.
Yeah.
It's a challenge to the core of their expertise,
Right.
and not everyone's willing to accept such a radical reinterpretation.
But even if Fomenko's new chronology is ultimately disproven, it still raises important questions about how we approach history.
Absolutely. It forces us to be more critical of our sources,
Right.
to acknowledge the limitations of our traditional methods, and to be open to the possibility that the past is far more complex
Okay.
and mysterious than we ever imagined.
So what's your take on all of this?
Yeah.
After diving deep into Fomenko's work, where do you stand?
For me, the beauty of his work lies in its potential
Yeah.
to spark new avenues of research.
Yep.
Even if his conclusions are ultimately proven wrong,
Yeah.
his methods and his questioning spirit
Yeah.
are so valuable.
Yeah.
He's forcing historians to re-examine their assumptions
Yeah.
and to look for new ways to test and verify the historical record.
He's like that friend who asks the really uncomfortable questions at a dinner party,
Yes.
making everyone squirm a little bit,
Totally.
but also sparking a lively discussion.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe this shaking up of the historical snow globe
I like that.
will reveal hidden patterns and connections that we never noticed before.
Right. It's like we've been given some new puzzle pieces
Yeah.
to fit into this historical puzzle.
Yeah.
And while they might not all belong,
Right.
they force us to look at the puzzle in a completely new way.
Exactly.
Hmm.
It reminds us that history is not this static, unchanging monolith.
Right.
It's this dynamic, evolving narrative
Yeah.
shaped by interpretation, evidence, and perspective.
And we're all part of that process.
We are.
Right? Constantly like shaping and reshaping the story as we learn more.
Exactly.
That's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's not just about learning facts.
It's about engaging with the past,
Right.
questioning what we know,
Yeah.
and being open to the possibility that the story's far from over.
Yeah. But we also need to acknowledge that Fomenko's work hasn't been without its critics.
Right. There are some strong counterarguments that we need to address.
Oh.
Then those are what we'll be diving into next.
Okay, so we've explored Fomenko's theories, even his global chronological map.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, there's been some pushback from the historical community.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Not everyone's on board with Fomenko's approach, and there are some valid criticisms.
Okay, so let's dive into those criticisms then. What are some of the main arguments against his new chronology?
Okay, well, one of the biggest criticisms is that his statistical methods, while interesting, aren't really rigorous enough to support such radical conclusions. Critics argue that he might be cherry-picking data to fit his theory and ignoring evidence that contradicts it.
So it's like finding a few puzzle pieces that seem to fit together
Yeah.
and declaring the whole puzzle solved
Right.
without considering all the other pieces that don't quite match up.
Exactly. It's like focusing on the pieces that fit your narrative.
Right.
And kind of brushing aside the ones that don't. And historians also point out that Fomenko often overlooks the massive amount of archaeological and historical evidence that supports the traditional timeline.
So it's like saying, I found a couple of typos in this book, so the whole story must be wrong.
Right?
Without considering the hundreds of pages that make perfect sense.
Exactly. Like, you can't just dismiss the whole thing based on a few inconsistencies.
Right. What else?
Another criticism is how Fomenko interprets ancient texts. Critics argue that he sometimes takes liberties with translations, that he misinterprets symbolism, and that he might even be imposing his own biases on the material.
So it becomes like a battle of interpretations then.
It does.
Whose reading of history is the most accurate and the most objective?
It's tough to say for sure. And let's not forget, Fomenko isn't a historian by training.
Right. He's a mathematician.
Exactly. So many historians see him as this outsider, kind of dabbling in a field that he doesn't fully understand.
Yeah. It's that classic clash between disciplines.
Totally.
The scientists stepping into the humanities and the humanities pushing back.
Yeah, and honestly, there are valid points on both sides. Fomenko's work is definitely thought-provoking, and it challenges us to think differently about history.
Yeah.
But it's also highly speculative and controversial.
So where does that leave us? Do we just throw up our hands and say, history is unknowable, let's just give up?
No, not at all. The debate sparked by Fomenko's work, while sometimes heated, is actually a sign of a healthy intellectual environment.
Wow.
It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions, to re-examine our assumptions, and to strive for a more accurate and nuanced understanding of the past.
So it's less about proving who's right or wrong, and more about refining our methods and deepening our understanding of history.
Exactly. And even if Fomenko's new chronology is ultimately disproven, his work has already had an impact. He's brought new tools and perspectives to the study of history and inspired researchers to explore new avenues of inquiry.
It's like he's shaken up the historical snow globe.
I like that visual.
And now we're all trying to figure out how to put it back together. Maybe in the process, we'll discover new patterns and connections we never even noticed before.
That's the hope. History is not this static, unchanging monolith.
Yeah.
It's a dynamic, evolving narrative shaped by interpretation, by evidence, by perspective. And we're all part of that process, constantly shaping and reshaping the story as we learn more.
That's what makes history so fascinating.
It really is.
There's always more to learn, more to discover. And Fomenko's work, whether you agree with his conclusions or not, reminds us to stay curious, to question what we think we know, and to keep an open mind.
Absolutely well said.
So what do you think, listeners? Has this deep dive into Fomenko's new chronology made you question everything you thought you knew about history?
Yeah. Have we convinced you that the past might be a little more malleable than we often assume?
Let us know your thoughts.
Yeah.
Share your opinions, your questions, your doubts.
Yeah, let's keep this conversation going.
And remember, this is just one chapter in our ongoing exploration of history's mysteries.
So many more to uncover.
We've got many more deep dives planned, so be sure to subscribe and join us for the next adventure.
Yes, we can't wait to share them with you.
Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep an open mind.
The past is full of surprises.